Book club, 80 for Brady. We all know and love this genre, right? Like ensembles of legendary women who come together for light comedies about aging, friendship, grief, etc., etc. The press tours are always fantastic.
Oh my God, it's so wonderful to see all of you in one place together like this. I love it.
You've got Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin cuddling, Rita Moreno talking about her dalliance with Marlon Brando, Diane Keaton's obvious and relatable reluctance to participate.
What about y'all? What do you do, Diane?
Leave me out.
You leave me out? You're like, I don't want
I'm
to
just
celebrate
going to
Mother's
sit
Day?
here. I'm enjoying it.
I'm never mad when I see another one of these movies announced, which is good because it seems like over the past 5 years, this kind of film has become more and more prevalent, to the point where we can recognize certain tropes and know exactly what we're getting when we buy a ticket to see one. At the same time, I think it's a rather underanalyzed genre with tons of gray areas worth exploring. Like, what the hell is this genre even called? There's no singular or tidy word to describe it, and every attempt I made at it just felt wrong. For our purposes, I'm going to call it book club cinema. And then there are questions of how exactly to define it. When researching this video, I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing any big entries in the genre, so I turned to my followers on Instagram and asked them what their favorite examples were. A significant portion of responses seemed to understand exactly the kind of movie I was talking about, but weren't sure whether or not their answers applied, replying with some version of, does this count? Does this include Steel Magnolias? What about the First Wives Club? How about It's Complicated? So in this video, I want to take a closer look at this emerging genre and start to draw its contours. Where does book club cinema come from? What do these films have in common? How do they reflect the changes or lack of changes in the industry? Of course, I've done my best to cover the major examples, but this video is not comprehensive. I'm sure I've missed some, so if I have, apologies, and do let me know in the comments films you think might belong in this genre and what your favorites are. Let's begin with giving the genre some structure so we're all on the same, no pun intended, page. Let's begin with the principles of book club cinema. First and foremost, the ensemble, a group of 3 or more women who are generally recognizable from long, highly respected careers and who interact primarily with each other throughout the film. While they may have romantic interests, male characters are sidelined to supporting roles, do not get substantial screen time, and are typically played by actors who are not of the same star caliber as the female leads. In the tradition of your George Brents and your Robert Montgomerys, they're there to be invariably well-mannered, romantic, and most importantly, hot. Recognizable faces that women in the audience will feel comfortable falling in love with for an hour and a half. These men are tangential by design and exist mainly to serve as the catalyst for whatever lesson the female lead learns or adventures she embarks on. In Calendar Girls, for example, a woman's husband is diagnosed with cancer, which causes the women to come together to raise money to replace an uncomfortable couch in the hospital. In Finding Your Feet, Imelda Staunton's husband's affair prompts her to move out and seek refuge with her free-spirited sister. It's important to note the function of male characters at the beginning because it's this that distinguishes book club cinema as a subgenre. While films like Something's Gotta Give, or It's Complicated, or My Name is Doris, or I'll See You in My Dreams share many characteristics with book club cinema, those slot more easily into the traditional rom-com space, following the arcs of male and female co-leads who the plot ultimately works to unite in the end. Undoubtedly, these genres are related to one another in that they share many of the same actors, are targeted at similar audiences, and make some of the same jokes. But book club cinema specifically emphasizes the group dynamics among women. Speaking of jokes, of course, the other major defining characteristic is that these are comedies, and there are certain kinds of jokes that appear again and again across these films. One consistent gag involves a woman displaying unexpected physical superiority over younger, more able-bodied individuals. 80 for Brady has many examples of this. When big, muscly dudes desperately grasp for milk in a hot wing eating contest, Sally Field's character breezes through the challenge with ease. Lily Tomlin's character, inspired by hallucinatory advice from Tom Brady, dominates a football throwing contest against a series of young, athletic-looking men. There are other types of jokes, like, for example, that older people don't know how to use technology.
Why am I a potato?
Ay, ay, ay.
But the most consistent and obvious jokes are about sex.
My only talents are poker and poking.
Poker and poking?
There are an inordinate number of dick jokes in these movies, both physical gags and the classic double entendre.
It sounds like we have a lethargic pussy in our hands.
I feel like this is pretty self-explanatory, however, it's worth noting because of how it flips the script on how films have traditionally depicted older women. Much like their spiritual predecessors, the Golden Girls, these films do not lead with the assumption that older women are quote-unquote past their prime, but instead ask us to consider them as sexual beings. They tell the jokes about each other or about themselves without derision or judgment.
I don't care what society says about women our age. Sex must not be taken off the table.
Hold on. I mean, we are 4 smart, successful women. I don't need a man.
No, my point is the choice should be ours.
Most of these characters are retired, but when they do have careers, their work is never the crux of the character's conflict, again maintaining the film's focus on friendship or romantic relationships. Candice Bergen may be a judge in Book Club, but it's not a legal comedy. Sally Field may be a professor in 80 for Brady, but it's not about tenure or chairing the department. At most, you'll have situational jokes like Bumble notifications going off in a meeting, but nothing more substantial than that. Being retired, many of these women live in borderline utopian assisted living or retirement communities, spacious, beautifully decorated facilities full of well-organized, well-funded activities. This is all part of the fantasy. Poverty is never the problem. Everyone is upper middle class, medical bills never bankrupt anyone, and even if at first glance amenities are not up to snuff, conflicts are framed as part of a positive learning process to adapt to a new environment. As we'll discuss later, a major goal of this genre is to dispel the fear of aging, to give women something to look forward to rather than dread as they get older. Fabricating a world in which assisted living is like a fun camp not only serves this more abstract goal, but also functionally gives them access to a peer group with whom they can go on their adventures. Palms gives Diane Keaton's character a community to revisit parts of her life that made her happy. In Moving On, Lily Tomlin's character knows another resident with a gun, which they need to carry out a murder plot. Death and dying are major themes in these films, either because a husband has recently passed, or someone has a life-threatening illness, or simply because of the slightly morbid awareness that they're in the third act of their lives. What regrets might they want to rectify? How might they move on after losing someone they'd spent the majority of their lives with? If they know they might not have a lot of time left, what risks might they take? They sometimes have children who attempt to mediate these questions with them, but are usually even more tangential than the male characters and are often portrayed as meddling or unable to empathize with the perspectives of the older individuals. Significantly, though, book club cinema has measurably less anxiety about competition from younger women than Nancy Meyers cinema. Those films, made in the mid-2000s to early 20-teens, drip with a potent brand of second-wave feminism that occasionally misplaces blame for male behavior on younger women. So with all of this in mind, we see a clear trend emerging, but there's also plenty of gray area here. Take something like Mamma Mia. Yes, those men are huge actors in their own right and have a fair share of screen time. Yes, half the story revolves around a young woman and her marriage. But also, are we really here for them? I love them, but I'm not. I'm here for Donna and the Dynamos, and I don't think I'm alone in that. So does that count? I think so. And then there are things like The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel and Steel Magnolias. These aren't straight up comedies, but they check a lot of the right boxes. The British examples especially, I mean, they're comedies, but the tone can be a little like,
"Oh dear, what is it? I've spontaneously combusted." "Oh, I am sorry." "Oh, it's quite all right. I've grown tired of living." "Ah, very good then. For the best." "Yes, indeed." "Oh, is it raining again?"
A significant reason there's so much gray area is because of how new the subgenre is and how it's developed over time. Let's take a look at the history of book club cinema. The modern iteration of this genre begins with 2018's Book Club, hence the title, which unexpectedly grossed over $100 million worldwide. A pretty extraordinary achievement for a non-franchise, IP-less film starring 4 women over 60. The film was conceived when writer-director Bill Holderman sent a copy of 50 Shades of Grey to his mother on Mother's Day. His collaborator and co-writer, Erin Sims, thought this was very funny, so she sent one to her mother too. Suddenly, a light bulb went off. There's comic potential in the idea of all these moms hanging out, reading the kinkiest mainstream book on the market. So Sims and Holderman wrote the screenplay with Diane Keaton and Jane Fonda in mind, both accepted, and the rest is history. Holderman generally attributes the success of the film to a few factors. First, never underestimate the popularity of 50 Shades of Grey, which everyone and their mom, literally I guess, was reading at the time. It was a topical, relatable concept and had the additional fun gimmick of casting Don Johnson, the father of 50 Shades of Grey star Dakota Johnson, as Fonda's lover. 10 out of 10 concept. Second, Book Club provided a rare opportunity for audiences to see a high caliber of actress in the same film. Despite the fact that these women and many of the women in these kinds of films have long and distinguished careers and have accumulated an inestimable number of awards, they've built these careers primarily co-starring alongside men and have had limited opportunities to act with one another. Relatedly, Holderman and Sims also saw the film as appealing to an underserved demographic, namely women in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. Although they didn't write the film specifically for that reason.
The interesting thing is we never made the movie thinking about an untapped audience or an unserved market. I mean, we were just sitting there writing a movie that we really wanted to see.
The movie still felt fresh because, as Holderman said in an interview, I don't think there was anything on the marketplace like it. It was a surprise to a lot of people. Sims also told IndieWire, I remember being really inspired by The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. I loved that movie and it was completely out of left field. It didn't matter what age they were. It was a good movie. Since the release of Book Club, we've seen a steady proliferation of copycats, many of which I've already mentioned, presumably in an effort to replicate those massive box office returns. Although none have quite performed at that level, including the sequel. So by now, when a film comes out that's like, I don't know, Jane Fonda, Blythe Danner, and Julie Walters raising money with a big sale to keep their favorite theater open or something, we all kind of react like, oh, it's another one of those. Clearly, a modern blueprint has been developed. But Book Club is obviously not the first film to unite legendary actresses in a comic vehicle. What about The First Wives Club or These Old Broads? Let's go back further. Think about the female stars from the 1920s through approximately the 1950s. Myrna Loy, the Bennetts, Dietrich, Dunn, Hopkins, Garson, Lamar, Hayworth, Turner, Hayward, Gardner. We associate each of them with certain decades because that's when the bulk of their memorable work occurred. Studios weren't concerned with the longevity of their careers, so it was highly unlikely that they could continue working as leads in well-funded, well-written films produced by a major studio over the course of several decades, particularly once they reached middle age. Old women had to be played by young women, so that old women would still look young. There are countless examples of this, but perhaps most famously, Angela Lansbury played Lawrence Harvey's mother in The Manchurian Candidate, despite the fact that she was only 3 years older than him. Anne Bancroft was just 6 years older than Dustin Hoffman in The Graduate. As an aside, I think this is something the internet has generally overlooked in the age gap discourse. Yeah, it's kind of inherently weird that, for example, Audrey Hepburn is paired romantically with Gary Cooper, a man 28 years her senior, in Love in the Afternoon. But this happens in part because Gary Cooper was allowed to be in that kind of film as an older man. Women were not. It doesn't matter if men look old, he could be afforded bigger and better opportunities for longer. In other words, the age gap issue is very much an employment issue, in addition to, everything else. So if a woman didn't tragically die young or choose to leave on her own, she would have extraordinarily limited options. Perhaps other avenues would open up. There might be supporting roles or television or even lead roles in a less reputable genre, but nothing that would ever take her to the heights she once had. They had a narrow window for relevance, and once they hit a certain ceiling with their ages, they were readily cast aside for younger women. Of course, there are notable exceptions. Katharine Hepburn, as usual, stands out as an outlier. Lauren Bacall, I'm sure many of you would agree, was robbed of an Oscar for The Mirror Has Two Faces. Supporting, but hey, a great role. But I think the most pertinent examples when thinking about the origins of book club cinema are Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. By 1962, both Crawford and Davis had trouble finding roles that suited their talents and star quality. When Crawford suggested they adapt the novel Whatever Happened to Baby Jane for the screen, studios balked at the idea. Sure, they had been stars of note in the 1930s and 40s, but why should they hire two old broads to lead a film in 1962? Who would watch that? Director Robert Aldrich told the New York Times 3 distributors read the script and looked at the budget and turned the project down. 2 of these said they might be interested if I would agree to cast younger players in the Davis and Crawford roles. I refused. Of course, the film went ahead and was a major success, revamping Davis and Crawford's careers, essentially launching the hag horror genre. Although this genre has a complicated relationship to the subject of aging, which I discuss more in my video about 1962, it undoubtedly provided an avenue for these actresses to consistently work well after Hollywood thought they'd become irrelevant. genre work outside of the traditional prestige studio fare could prolong their careers. Keep in mind that in 1962, Davis and Crawford were in their early 50s. Davis was the age Jennifer Aniston is as of the publication of this video, the same age Cate Blanchett currently is, a woman who's been doing some of the best work of her career. Clearly, the age at which the industry turns its back on stars has changed. We can also look to the Academy Awards for proof. Over the past 10 years, the average age of Best Actress winners has been much higher than it has at any other point in history. The women currently starring in book club cinema represent the generation of actresses who all began working in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Rather than being phased out of work en masse like the generation before them, they took on roles in films like The First Wives Club and Steel Magnolias, films that follow them into middle age. Now, having passed through middle age, we follow them again into senior life. The ceiling is changing with them. We are essentially witnessing the first generation of actresses allowed to age and work en masse. This also spins off into a separate conversation about aesthetics and aging, all the creams, nips, tucks, lasers, peels, and everything else that's keeping everybody youthful for as long as possible that simply didn't exist in 1962, and that really makes you wonder if things have actually changed, or if we're still just as fearful as ever of looking old and just demand women do all of this to compensate. But anyway, they will be the first to tell you that this hasn't been an easy process, that opportunities still feel few and far between, and that some of this shit still happens. Emmy Rossum is playing Tom Holland's mom, even though she's 10 years older than him, just like Sally Fields, who was 10 years older than Tom Hanks when she played his mother. And the feedback the book club team received should sound familiar to you too. Holderman said in an interview, just like Aldrich, we got a lot of pressure to cast younger during the financing process, and it was just never the movie we wanted to make. Still, book club cinema represents a clear and welcome change. For one thing, it keeps these women working. Audiences have loved them for decades, and if they still want to work, then they should have every opportunity to do so. It's worth noting, though, that the majority of book club cinema casts are also composed primarily of white women. There will be one woman of color as part of the ensemble, if that. In Palms, we have Pam Grier, there's Loretta Devine in Queen Bees, Angela Bassett in Otherhood, and really that's where it lands. If the argument holds that we're following this generation into old age, then it's sadly unsurprising that these films will reflect the fact that very few women of color were allowed the longevity and prestige of their white peers. Secondly, book club cinema proves women can work and enjoy working together. I don't think this is a stereotype people worry about too much these days, but for their generation, it was a major hurdle and one they continue to discuss in interviews.
Back in the day when I was younger, there was this assumption that women were kind of catty and women 4 stars working together wouldn't work because they'd be competing and all of this, and it's just not true.
Before we made the first one, I had so many people who heard who I was working with. And by the way, none of us had ever worked together before, no combination of us, which is pretty weird considering how long we've been around. But people would say to me, oh, wow, I wonder who's going to be the diva, who's going to, what is that going to be like? That's going to be so intense. And I work with these women that every single day they're on time, they know their lines, they're ready to play. It was just so the opposite of the kind of assumptions people make about women who are successful, who work together. And I really honestly fell in love with all 3 of them.
Remember that women barely got to work together for most of American film history. You mostly get co-stars of a similar caliber if, at the time, it was a she's on her way up in popularity, she's on her way down situation. This structural separation fueled this misogynistic stereotype and prevented a lot of cool work from happening. I mean, imagine book club cinema with the Warner Brothers girlies. Anyway, Mary Steenburgen really carried these Book Club 2 interviews, and she offered some great insight into what she hopes films like that can do for older women. She knows how women are supposed to view aging based on what they've been told either subliminally or explicitly by the media and the film industry all their lives, and believes films like this can remedy that negative messaging.
Well, it didn't surprise me because I've been in the business since I was 24, and I watched how the business treated women as they aged. I do think it's getting better, but a movie like this makes a difference. And I think it's important not just for women our age, but more important for young women like yourselves, because you've got to have something to look forward to in life. And you've got to know that you're going to count no matter what age you are, and that you could have adventures, that you could scare yourself.
And it gets better.
It gets better.
It gets better.
After all, stories about older people are few and far between generally. And when they do come around, they're often so depressing that it's hard to even motivate yourself to want to watch them. I loved Away from Her. I know what Alzheimer's can do to a person and how important it is to tell stories about what it's like to experience that as a family member. But holy shit, that cannot be the only thing we talk about when we talk about getting older. It's no coincidence that hag horror films like Baby Jane are specifically concerned with how aging affects a woman. It perverts her into a grotesque caricature. It warps her mind. It drives her to hysterics. In contrast, book club cinema insists that aging does not necessarily mean a loss of relevance, joy, or community, refreshingly subverting these well-worn tropes. Jane Fonda added in Pop Culture Weekly,
We're all brave in real life, the four of us. Diane's not here. And we tend to do things that are adventurous. And so we wanted to be in a movie that gives people who are younger hope that, you know, getting older can be adventurous. You know, you can live your dreams if you want to, and that we're not afraid of taking chances. And that's an important message to put out, right? Everybody's so scared of being old. Come on.
That said, these films are fun, but are they up to the standard these women deserve? Do they adequately showcase the immense talent they possess? Probably not. I admit that I have to confront my own biases here. Why don't I think these opportunities are up to par? Do they need to make some intense prestige drama for it to really count as a good vehicle? Isn't comedy worthwhile and a valid venture? Okay, yes, but also, come on. I mean, even if we're just talking comedy, these women have performed works by Neil Simon, Jane Wagner, and Mike Nichols. They can handle more sophisticated material than dick puns, and I don't think it's wrong to ask for a little more than what they're getting. I'm not alone in this. Heather Schwadel in Slate suspects that there's something patronizing about our society's embrace of the old ladies and hijinks genre. Peter DeBruge adds, it's a pleasure to watch these legends riff off of one another in 80 for Brady, even if the jokes feel oddly patronizing both to the characters and to its target audience. Bizarrely enough, that leaves the PG-13 rated film feeling like a kid's movie much of the time. Richard Lawson hits the nail on the head in Variety, writing, given that the older ladies lark has grown into a financially viable genre, I'm wondering where all the truly good scripts are. These plug-and-play movies have lost much of their charm at this point, feeling more like a slightly degrading duty than any kind of demographic triumph. Even Jane Fonda is openly over it at this point. In a recent interview at Cannes, she said of this brand of film, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't know what's coming next, except that I don't want to do any movies that don't challenge me as an actor. I want to be challenged. I want to play something really complicated. Again, this pattern reflects hag horror of the 1960s. We prefer to see these women working. We know these films aren't cinematic masterpieces, but we enjoy watching them anyway because they're fun. And yet deep down, isn't it also just a little upsetting to watch all that talent funneled into this?
And it was then, on the hallowed turf of Gillette Stadium, that Gronk took her, and she knew this was the best a man could get.
Libby just convinced Baby Gronk to commit to LSU.
Thankfully, unlike hag horror, these films do not delight in the humiliation of these actresses. Degradation is not the point, far from it. But like hag horror, you get the sense that this is all that is available to them. The ladies always do a lot of press for these films, and while they're always a hoot, they're also mildly frustrating. A, because how many times are you going to ask Mary Steenburgen about Ted Danson? This woman has an Oscar. And B, when they aren't being asked about their real-life friendships, they're almost exclusively asked about things that they made decades ago. The implicit message here is that their best, most challenging, interesting work is behind them, and the most they can look forward to is another book club movie, and that's that. 70 is the new 50, the age at which Hollywood runs out of ideas for women and offers them a single, quote-unquote, lesser genre to play with. Why, though? Where's their Irishman, Meyerowitz stories, Old Man and the Gun, Youth? Hell, Jane Fonda was in that movie for 5 minutes and was easily the best part. Give her more scripts like that. Men, of course, have their equivalent to book club cinema, Expendables cinema, and other similar problems to women as they age. Fewer roles are available to just a handful of actors and can be depressing as all hell even if they're great. At the same time, they do have more options in traditional prestige dramas. Most of the good opportunities actors like Pacino and De Niro are getting are continuations of fruitful collaborations that have built over decades. A lot of the directors who consistently worked with women as their primary collaborators aren't around anymore. Cassavetes, Bergman, well, I guess there's Woody Allen, the literal last man I'd expect to pay attention to an older woman. Anyway, maybe in like 30 years when Sofia Coppola and Kirsten Dunst are still working together, we can get a candy-colored take on aging that has a Phoenix song in it or something. As I mentioned, things are changing. I think Michelle Yeoh is a great example of how this could go. Not only is Everything Everywhere All at Once the best material she's been given in her career in the United States, it's some of the best material any 60-year-old woman has been given in the past few years. And look at how well that did. There are other great examples. I'm constantly begging people to watch 45 Years, a quietly intense film that has an ending I randomly think about all the time. Alfre Woodard was totally snubbed for her performance in 2019's Clemency, and TV is an entirely different can of worms. Look at Jean Smart or Christine Baranski. You could even argue that Grace and Frankie really kicked off book club cinema before book club even existed. So if you were to rank entries in the book club cinema genre, what would you place at the top? What's God tier to you? Is book club better than 80 for Brady? Did the next chapter surpass the original? Is These Old Bras the best this can possibly get? Well, I went ahead and made my own tier ranking, and if you're interested in seeing how I arranged everything, head on over to Nebula where you can watch this video with 10 extra minutes of content right now, ad-free. Actually, all of the videos I've made for YouTube are currently streaming ad-free on Nebula, and everything I make in the future will be too. One of the main reasons I was so excited to join Nebula is because it's creator-founded and creator-led. Everyone involved in running this service really cares about encouraging creators to make the things they're excited to make, not just things that we think will get the most clicks or that the algorithm will like. That means we can experiment, dig into niche topics, and really push ourselves to the next level. I don't usually do reactions or ranking kind of stuff, but why not dip my toe into that in a place where I know I can try something new? And this is just the beginning. I've got big plans for what I can do there in the future. Nebula cares about its creators, but it also cares so much about its audience. They want you to have a seamless experience. That's why everything on Nebula is ad and algorithm free. You won't get any pre-roll ads. There won't be 12 interruptions in the middle of a single video. Everything on Nebula is paid for with subscriptions. So when you sign up, you support my channel as well as an entire community of creators. Right now, they have an amazing offer going where you can get an annual plan for just $30. That's $250 a month for exclusive content from creators you're probably already watching, like Patrick Willems, Big Joel, and Broe Deschanel. It's a great deal, so if you're interested, click the link in my description to sign up and support the channel. Thank you.
Come on, Barry. Come on. Get off your asses for these old broads.